The three main facts we based our talk was about, first of all, that more and more companies are investing in open source, and that means that the project ecosystem is growing and evolving, and also that means that we need to seek and try new strategies in order to overcome all these changes we are actually facing.
Yeah, indeed, there is this analysis from IDC where they say that a big chunk of the source code in large corporations will be coming from third-party software repositories. This doesn't mean that everything is going to be open source, but it means that probably a big chunk of this percentage is going to be open source. So we all, let's say, need to learn how this works, and probably the open source ecosystem, the open source cake is going to be growing and growing and growing. So there are some complexities and difficulties that are kind of within all of this analysis.
And well, to get into this strategy and make a clear example, let's talk about the community manager role. Because previously, the community manager was in charge of one single project, and she or he needed to make sure their project is growing and is healthy enough and so on. But as this ecosystem is evolving, now we're facing a different perspective. Now it's not about thinking about just one project, but an interaction between a wide variety of projects, and because they are interrelated, and we need to get knowledge about all these projects because of the implementation of these open source models.
Yeah. So it was quite interesting for me during this morning that one of the first sentences that Thierry mentioned during his keynote was cross-community collaboration. And we had again the same during the second keynote. That was quite interesting because, when we sent this proposal here, we thought maybe this is not the right place for this, but after attending the first two keynotes, we said, well, this seems to be kind of a really interesting place to try to, well, evolve in somehow this concept of cross-community collaboration, because we have this OpenInfra ecosystem that, well, communities are converging. We need to deal with things in our companies like release schedules, release cycles. We need certain commercial interest for each of the actors that are playing and developing there. So how can we build a healthy ecosystem? How can we adjust all of the interest across all of these organizations, right?
And when we are thinking about the software projects, there is indeed not just community manager roles. We can also find other types of role, more based in growing user communities, such as DevRels, brand evangelists, or community advocates. And with these new strategies, there are some companies that are trying to figure out where to map all these roles to optimize this strategy.
So the to-do group, I don't know if you're aware of its existence, but it's a set of companies that are openly working in learning how to deal with open source projects, right? So this is just an example of the way that companies out there are doing, and they are kind of building some strategy. So if you are willing to learn something else about the to-do group, so you can look for this, and you see some logos there. So they are openly collaborating in building what dealing with open source means for them. And if you think about open source program offices, which is kind of the strategy they are using, we have to deal with legal, or we have to deal with marketing or public relationship or security, all within all of these organizations in the release process out there. And then at the same time, some of these companies are competitors against each other, right? So how to build this concept of, how can we build something that is useful for everyone, right? So we need this strategy. And a big part of this strategy is metrics.
Yeah, as Daniel said, it's indeed about getting knowledge of what we are doing. And we need to be more data-driven in order to get, as I said, the ecosystem is growing, and we've got a wide amount of information. We need to manage that information and to measure in order to know. Because if we are not measuring, we're just basing our decisions on opinions. And this brings us to the concept from moving from art to science. And let me explain this better. Because initially, all these profiles, all these roles, such as the community manager, they used to make decisions based more on gut feeling, personal interactions, opinions, and as community is growing, as all the interrelations are being created, we need to move more to a scientific approach in order to measure all this information and base our decisions from hypotheses, observations, and in general terms, being more data-driven. And I wanted to ask you, like, how do you make decisions? Just think about it, and you can also, when we finish the talk, discuss it.
So the research data set we are using is we retrieve all of the Git repositories from OpenStack in the list of official ones that are in the governance file, then OpenShift, OKD, and all of the CNCF ecosystem, incubated and graduated on all of these projects, right? So in terms of size, OpenStack is around 1 million something commits, CNCF is around 500,000, and OpenShift is around 100,000. So you have a measure of size somehow. The tooling we are using is open source, is Grimoire Lab. So Grimoire Lab is the open source project. Bitergia Analytics is the solution we are providing, which is basically the same. But it's a good practice to have this difference in the branding and so on. But in short, what we have is a bunch of data sources. That we have Git, GitHub, all of this. And then this is extracted by Perceval. All of this tooling is Python-based, so in case you are interested in playing with this, happy to help you from a community perspective. Perceval, it's kind of the right tool to start with because you have kind of a front end for all of these data sources, and then you will get a JSON document, so you can parse and store everything with this kind of documents. It happens that we are using Elasticsearch for storing the data, then you have some identities manager named as sorting hat, and then the final thing we are going to visualize is the browser, which are some examples, but you can have some outcomes like any other data sets, databases, or this type of information.
So the following slides you will visualize is going to look more or less like this. So just to get things clear, the dots you're visualizing are supposed to be contributors. The rectangles are repositories or projects. The dot size means the amount of repos, and the thick means the amount of commits.
So we are going to show 3 specific use cases. We are using this concept of personas where basically we are profiling and grouping either people or organizations by certain characteristics. So we will start with CERN as an example of an organization working and adopting Kubernetes, several OpenStack projects, and OpenShift. So we've seen that they have specific contributions in the 3 ecosystems. Then we'll go to Red Hat, Uber, and Rackspace as another case where we can compare activity for this. And then at the very end, we have the big picture where we have all of the CNCF ecosystem plus OpenShift. So starting with CERN. Then we have a demo, so we can go there. Not this one, this one. Yeah, okay.
So this is CERN community, and you can actually see here it's OpenShift. Okay, and if you zoom out, you can see it's a little bit like isolated from the rest, and right there is Kubernetes. And one curious thing about Kubernetes is that here, yeah, you can see one contributor that it's really important because it's the one that actually is connecting Kubernetes with the OpenShift, OpenStack community. And it's basically what you can see with this visualization is basically the connectors and also who's being the connector and have both knowledge of communities, basically.
Yeah. So we like to use the concept of connectors, and Diane Mueller, she uses the concept of mavens. So the connectors are these people that are helping to flow information between both communities, in this case, OpenStack and Kubernetes. We can see that, for instance, there are not connections for OpenShift, which are these two people working in these two repositories, and this information is for the last 5 years. So we have two people only focused on OpenShift. But then we have these interesting people around here that are the connectors. And connectors are quite important because they know people from several perspectives and from several projects. So if we have a specific question about what's going on with the community, or if that developer knows another contributor, these kind of specific connectors are the right people to ask for this. So from a community management perspective, it's quite interesting because we can point using the data to the right people in the right place, right? Yeah. So the next example we have is Uber, Red Hat, and Rackspace. So for this, I go again to this. You all know that Red Hat is mainly driven. OpenShift is mainly driven by Red Hat. I remember the numbers as they were contributing up to 80% of the total amount of commits, which is a big chunk, but there are some other companies participating, right? So this big star here is OpenShift. We have some important developers. Remember, the bigger the dot, the more commits that developers were contributing to the analysis. This is the Red Hat activity in Kubernetes. And then it happens that we have a couple of extra communities here. And this is Jagger, as far as I remember, yeah, and this is OpenTracing. So the different colors are, the brown ones are Uber developers, and the green ones are Rackspace. So we can see some other developers here from Rackspace, and some other contributions somewhere in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So these two projects are kind of tangential to OpenShift from a community management perspective, but it happens that, we have several Red Hat developers, like this developer, Greg Swift in this case, and some other developer here, and some others that are participating in Jagger, in Kubernetes. They are participating in OpenShift, so they are participating in the several ecosystems, right? So these are the right people we are interested in pinging, right? Because they are the connectors, they are the mavens of our community. Because the other approach is that let's see if this works. We only go for Uber, so I'm removing Red Hat and Rackspace information. And for the last 2 years, this is the information we have. So if we go simply to analyze Uber activity, we don't know who these developers are. We don't know the connectors. We don't know who else is working with them and in which other projects are working, right? The only things we can know is, they seem to be working in OpenTracing, they seem to be working in Jagger, and one of the main developers is Jury. So this kind of information is quite interesting, and these visualizations is quite, let's say, easy to play with and get useful insights. Yeah, and the final example we have is this one. Yeah, it's this is the CNCF plus OpenShift ecosystem, which is all of the data we have. We are ignoring in this case OpenStack. And it's interesting because we have this big star, or big like our sun. This is Kubernetes, right here on the left, and then we have some planets like Prometheus, gRPC, Bitergia, OpenTracing, Envoy, and some others, Fluent, and then we have OpenShift, right? So basically we have all CNCF and OpenShift, and then we have this messy information here. So if we go we zoom in, we realize that there are some projects where the connections are right in the middle of everywhere. So these are kind of projects connecting other projects, because there are people that are working in those projects and in all of the other projects at the same time. So they are working in Kubernetes, they are working in Prometheus, they are working and so on. Going to the specific example of OpenShift, this is OpenShift, this is Kubernetes. So we have this chunk of developers here, like 70% of them are Red Hatters. But these developers here are the ones that understand how to work at the same time in Kubernetes and how to work at the same time in OpenShift. And they are the ones probably helping to have these converge of communities in terms of schedules, release cycles, and understand the idiosyncrasy of both communities and so on. And in the same way that we have OpenShift and Kubernetes, we can go for Juggle and Kubernetes, which are these developers here. Then we have developers that are working like these three here in Kubernetes, in OpenShift, and in Juggle. So, I mean, there are several of them, and you can zoom in, and then you can check who they are and what they are doing and how they can help the community. So we have this concept of, well, communities are growing really big, so it's becoming more and more complex to understand what's going on, right? And we need to move from this idea of the art of the community, this really well-known book by John Bacon, to something more systematic, more approachable, use some science, use statistics, right, to understand what's going on, and then get the point about all of this. So, some lessons learned.
Yeah. To sum up, we can learn some lessons here. The first one, I think the most important one, is that companies are not focusing just in one thing, or shouldn't be focusing just in one project. Because it's an interconnection of a wide variety of projects, a wide variety of contributors, developers interacting each other among different projects. And because of that, the upstream coordination is really important. But nonetheless, the relationships still matter, even though now we are going to a more data-driven approach, and this ecosystem is evolving and growing. We shouldn't forget relationships. And also another important point is that we need to move from community managers towards community development, because community management, because of we're growing, and there are companies involved, organizations involved, developers, interrelations each other, we cannot manage that wide amount of information. We should learn to start developing communities. And basically that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So a good example of this is, I remember we incorrectly assigned one of the developers to Tencent, a cloud provider there in Asia. And Diane was digging into the data, and then she realized that was he was a developer from Alibaba, specifically Alipay. It happens that he was working on his own time, but he had the chance to understand who this developer was. He knew one of the connectors of the community. That developer pointed her to the right people, and then it happens that Red Hat is building a use case with Alibaba with these developers, because they were indeed trying the technology, the OpenShift technology. So this is a good example of doing community development and not community management, because the idea here is to foster relationships across all of the companies. And then it happens that we were at the Open Source Leadership Summit in California at the beginning of March, and we were talking about this example, and then we had Tencent developers there. And then the Tencent developers approached again Diane and said, hey, we are from Tencent, and we are indeed using OpenShift. So then suddenly she realized that she had another two, let's say, business leads or business examples that she can keep developing the community. So this is why the difference between community management and community development and why relationships matter. And of course, she couldn't have done this without domain knowledge. So Diane has the domain and the understanding, the deep understanding of OpenShift and Kubernetes and all of this ecosystem. and then it happens that I had some skills in terms of, well, having the data, understanding where things were going. So it was this domain knowledge and joining forces here was really, really useful. Then data matters, of course, having created data and all of this. And we had this this idea of anonymity is death, but not exactly like this, but based on our experience. So this Alibaba developer had kind of a weird name like you and a big set of numbers all together. So it's kind of impossible for a human being to say, this developer, who is he? But having these connectors is quite easy to go there and ask them, and then you finally understand what's going on there. So this is all. I don't know if you have any question. Yep.
You mentioned that anonymity is dead, but I'm just wondering for every point on that graph, how anonymity was built. As in, not everyone will, on their GitHub ID, tell you their affiliation by their work. So were you able just to present the company or the individuals for whom you could extract a company? What happened about the people who didn't share an affiliation?
Yeah, so this specific connector, well, the Alipay example was based on an incorrect affiliation we had because they were using QQ.com, and we say this is Tencent, but this is not Tencent. This is kind of Gmail. So it was kind of being lucky in that case. So of course there are. I mean, we in OpenShift in CNCF we have a big chunk of developers that we don't know affiliation at all, and it's something like a 20%, 20-something%. It happens that depending on the community, they are working really hard to have that information in place as CNCF. So you have dev stats, for instance, and then you have affiliation file. OpenStack Foundation is another case, clear case. It's true that it's hard to have all of this information, but at the same time, the same companies are really interested in saying, well, we are contributing to this project because they have commercial interest, and they want to say we are really key players here, right? So
there was a follow-on to that, which was that Microsoft owned Git, and Microsoft also owned LinkedIn. Do you see any evidence that Microsoft is producing graphs like this and feeding it into their LinkedIn profiles?
I have no idea. More questions, comments, concerns? No? Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.